Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Sin Bin. We are back for installment number 3 of our interview with esteemed guest Andy Bassford. For those of you who have not seen part 1 and part 2 of what the CMB Reggae staff now affectionately refer to as the Bassford Files, please go to CMB Reggae YouTube channel and check it out. In the last part, we went off a tangent. We went off on a tangent and talked about the origins of dancehall reggae as part of personal indulgence on my behalf. For this part, we'll be jumping back to Mr. Bassford's various touring experiences. Welcome once again, sir. How are you today?
A bit sleepy and but functional.
Okay. Well, we're gonna try to do our best. I know you're slightly under the weather, and I will try to accommodate you as best as possible. Where we left off at the end of part 2 was we were talking about all the magic that was happening at Skateland and essentially the origins of the dancehall reggae movement in a uh, commoditized way, or in an official way, um, as a result of what happened in Skateland. So, uh, where we left off, you were playing with We the People, and what I want to do is cover how you went from playing with We the People to touring with Dennis Brown.
Okay, so when I joined We the People, I knew that they were Dennis Brown's backing band or had been, but it didn't really register because I was trying to adjust to a bunch of new people, all of whom had interesting and strong personalities. And I was trying to adjust to the way that they did things, which was learn all the songs for one show and one rehearsal. This could be anywhere from 8 to 12 artists. And you would
Mhm.
run through these things once or twice and be expected to remember them. So that was a big stretch from what I did in Connecticut, which was cover bands. And back in the day, you put together a cover band, you decided kind of what area of popular music you would cover. You learned 4 or 5 sets of songs, however long that took you, and then you got an agent or not and went out to work. And you would update the repertoire, as songs got popular, you would learn them. But it was fairly low pressure. You'd get a phone call learning, these 5 songs, be ready for rehearsal. You'd come into rehearsal, you'd have your parts worked out. It wouldn't be any artists, just people in the band. And you would learn the songs at whatever pace was comfortable for everybody. Now, We the People, um, completely the opposite of that. The first rehearsal, I came in and I had my little notebook and my pencil and my little, music paper and stuff. And I was sitting there in the chair very attentively. And the first artist came in. It might have been the Tamlins, come to think of it, a great group that should be better known. And they were doing this, I think it's a Frankie Johnny Ray song. I'm not sure. Anyway, it's I believe it was a big hit for some singer in the 50s, and then the Dells did it in the 60s. And then the Tamlins they played it pretty straight. They sang it fairly much like the Dells record. So it's a pretty complicated tune. I wasn't familiar with it at all. Um, and they played the record, and I'm madly trying to write down the chords and uh, so on and so forth. And I was going to ask if we could play the record again, and then we started running the song. So I did the best I could, and then we ran it again. Then they went to the next tune, which was Tingling or something like that. And I started writing that down. And Dean Fraser looks at me and starts laughing and says, Andy, you're not going to have time for all that. And I said, okay. Put the book down, went into, heavy duty memory collection.
Mhm.
And this is how we learned tunes. Now, we would occasionally have rehearsals of our own, which were songs that Lloyd wanted to learn for the band's own shows. And I think was about to explain what We the People did in the previous one, and we
Mhm.
went off into the dance hall world. But unlike you might expect for the top band in Jamaica, we didn't just tour with famous reggae artists and play concerts. We also played dances in the country, and we played corporate functions like Bank of Jamaica. We played talent shows. We played functions for various, clubs. It was almost like an American club date band, except it was one of the greatest reggae bands in the world. And the musicians were really good, and they could play all these things and sound effective. If they played an R&B tune, it really sounded like it was supposed to sound. They took real pride in making things sound and feel like the record, and they had a huge repertoire of stuff that they could pull out at any given moment, none of which there was music for, none of which they told, there wasn't like a list, go learn these songs. It was, you're in the band, keep up. And there was and the probably the most fun gigs were the country dances. We'd get booked by, say, the Police Association of Lucy, which is, in out near Negril. And you'd go out there, drive out there 2-3 hours in the van, you'd set up. There'd be enormous quantities of food. You would play the first set, which consisted of whatever was on Jamaican radio. And Jamaican radio, for those unfamiliar in those days, played a wide variety of stuff, primarily American and English artists. It was very, very close to like American radio, but the most popular local songs would also be on it. So I remember one of the things we used to do was oh gosh, a Cheryl Lynn tune, the R&B singer, and
Yeah.
Dean has a high voice, and Dean used to sing the high tenor
To be
R&B
real.
tune. Dean Fraser.
Yeah. The song is To Be Real. That was
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
Yes.
We played that, and we played. I'm trying to think. How about us? The Champagne tune. Some people were made for down. How about us? Ruddy Thomas used to sing that, and Ruddy liked the Michael Jackson songs. So, we did "Lady in My Life." We did Ray Goodman and Brown. Must be a special lady.
Mhm.
These kinds of things that you would have heard on New York R&B radio. And but we also played, oh gosh, later on, this is an unlikely tune, we played Physical by Olivia Newton-John. And the band on that is Toto, basically. It's Steve Lukather and Jeff Porcaro and all those guys.
Mhm.
And the track really rocks out. Olivia's not a known rock and roll singer, but the track really rocks out. And Lloyd in particular sounded amazing. He was just playing this stuff, and he felt like the greatest rock and roll bass player in the world. And after we ran the tune through once, he looked at me and said, "If this is rock, I love rock. I love this song." So
And you're like, no.
and Lloyd didn't really know much about rock. It wasn't really his
Mhm.
thing. Different people in the band had different realms of expertise. Dean always knew what was going on in the dance hall. Nambo was kind of the jazz expert. Um, Ruddy was like the R&B love man expert. Bubbler, another heavy R&B, scholar. Devon, the drummer, was into jazz, and he was into odd time signatures of all things. Like 5/4 and 7/4.
Mhm.
And Bo P was into um, Eric Gale and people like that. And you know, there were they had they were sophisticated listeners who basically, if the music got to Jamaica, they had heard it and knew something about it. So anyway, getting back to the dances, the first set would be kind of relaxed, and you'd play some ballads, you'd play some up tempo R&B things, um, you'd play some soca near the end of it. You'd play. We used to play stuff off the last Bob Marley album that he did. I can never. Is it Survival? No, it's the one after that. It has Coming In From the Cold. We used to play that. We used to play
Mhm.
a couple of other things from that album. And Dean used to sing the Bob Marley songs. So we would play that, and that would be the first set. And then we take this really long break and eat ridiculous amounts of food. These, parties always had ridiculous amounts of food straight from the country. If it was pig, the pig had been killed that day. That kind of stuff.
Mhm.
So we would almost go into a food coma, and then we would recover and go out and play the second set, which was the critical set for me because it was essentially the history of reggae played backwards.
Mhm.
They started with what was happening in the early 80s, and then
The most current cut, and then move backwards in time.
yes, and then they would play 70s stuff, and then they would play uh 60s reggae, and then 60s rock steady, and then a ton of ska tunes, a big long Scatolites
Right.
segment. And the last song would always be "Oh Carolina" by the Folks Brothers.
The
You
one
know,
that
the
the
one
one
that
that
Shaggy did.
Shaggy did. Right.
Yeah, that's a
Okay.
really important record in Jamaican history, in that it's the first time you hear the Rastafarian drumming on a pop record.
Okay.
And it's it's a high watermark in the history of the music, and that was always the last song. But that wasn't why it was the last song. Um, it was the last song because of the obscene lyrics. Oh Carolina, through Wapshua, oh Carolina, Wapshua. That's what it is on the record, right?
Hmm.
But at these dances, it was, oh Carolina, kiss me, Ross. Bomba cloud, oh Carolina, kiss me,
Uh-huh.
Ross. Imagine like 200 drunken policemen at 3 in the morning with their dates, and in a field in Lucy singing "Kiss Me, Ross," Bumbaclot at the top of their lungs. I mean, nothing like it. This is how I learned the music. I learned it on the bandstand.
Right.
They didn't tell me what tune was coming next. They told me nothing. It was one enormous segue. There were no breaks, and it was anywhere from an hour and a half to 2.5 hours long, this last set. And it was critical because I had to catch everything on the fly. Usually I was doubling the bass line, but sometimes there were signature guitar lines, which Dean would sing to me after I'd missed them, and, no, man, do this, he'd sing the line and I would try to play it. And, it was kind of a non-critical audience, but the, the pressure from the band was unrelenting. They expected you to nail this stuff,
Right.
and no helping hands were extended.
Hmm.
And they weren't really trying to break my balls. I don't think it was just that kind of matter of fact. You want to be with the best. Okay, show you belong.
Right.
So we would do those, and then we would do these shows like Skateland where we backed artists, a bunch of them. And then we would occasionally go to places, Miami or New York, places with large Jamaican populations, and do the same thing there that we did at Skateland. But the other thing was touring with Dennis, and how that happened was, unbeknownst to me, Dennis was signed to A&M around the time I did my first session for Joe Gibbs that resulted
Okay.
in the two tracks that are on Foul Play, the first album.
Hmm.
Errol T didn't say anything. He just said this, he just put the songs up. And I said, that's Dennis Brown. He goes, yes. So I played on those two tracks, figured they'd show up on an album someday. Didn't think anything of it. And then the third or fourth time I played at Skateland with the band, uh, we were going to do rehearsals, and Lloyd said, we're doing an extra rehearsal this week because Dennis is coming. I said, Dennis Brown? He said, yes. So these guys were always serious, but the Dennis Brown rehearsal was a whole other level of serious.
Hmm.
And
Well,
this
with
one,
if they're assigned to A&M, that means that there's big money.
well, it wasn't even really that. It was Dennis was their favorite artist.
Okay. All right.
In my experience, the vast majority of the artists were very cool.
Hmm.
But Dennis was their favorite musically,
Hmm.
and they had been playing with him, um, for a while. And he was on Laser, which is the subsidiary of Warner Brothers in England. And that was when
Okay.
they went over and did the Montreux Jazz Festival on the strength of Money in My Pocket. And then after that, I don't know what happened with Warner Brothers, but I think that was just an English deal. So anyway, this guy used to work for Motown named Maxwell, can't remember his first name, put the deal together, and Dennis was signed to A&M through Joe Gibbs, which was a problem because Joe Gibbs collected the money and not Dennis, and that's another whole story. But
Hmm.
in any case, as far as everybody was concerned, Dennis Brown was going to be on a major label. But we didn't even really know that for the rehearsals. It was just that Dennis was coming to Skateland and it was going to be a very big deal. So we spent the whole rehearsal just on Dennis's songs, some of which I knew, a lot of which I didn't. And here they were really careful to take time to make sure I really had everything. Yeah, that part wasn't
Right.
sink or swim. It was
Right.
it was intense, but it wasn't ear training 101.
Hmm.
So anyway, the next we were backing other artists on the show, and Dennis was closing. So we got to the gig, did sound check, and normally when you did sound check, there'd only be a few people in Skateland. It was already packed to the gills for sound check.
Hmm.
I said, and I knew Dennis was popular, but I didn't realize how popular he was in Jamaica. And then it got time to play, and we started playing. And then I noticed, Skateland was in the middle of Halfway Tree, which is basically, urban Kingston. And there were office buildings. The JBC was there, and there were some insurance companies and things that were right near Skateland. And I looked over my shoulder, and I had the sensation of being watched. I noticed that all the lights in all the office buildings were on, and people were hanging out of the windows, and there were people on top of the office buildings. And apparently the cleaning staff had let all their friends in. And then there were people up in the trees, like people were like in trees watching the show. And it was kind of like being in a fishbowl. The only part that wasn't where there wasn't somebody way up in the air was the part of the part facing Halfway Tree Road, because there weren't any buildings there. But the rest of it was, you were being watched not only in front but from all angles. I mean, I was nervous. I still hadn't been in the band that long, and this is Dennis Brown, and everybody's really excited about it, and obviously the people are excited about it, and I'm going, okay, at least I got a rehearsal. So we used to play an overture for Dennis, Jamaicans clap at the beginning of songs. So somebody figured out before I was in the band that if we played a medley of intros, people would hear the first song, they'd recognize it, they'd clap, and then they would switch into another intro. People would recognize that and they clap, and then after three or four of them, the audience would go was already in a frenzy because they'd already applauded for three or four songs, none of which we had actually played.
Right.
And and Dennis, and where's Dennis? The band is playing this overture. I've heard four of my favorite songs, but they haven't played them. They just play the intros. It was a very effective showbiz tactic to get the audience riled before he hit the stage. So we're playing the medley, and I'm trying to remember everything. And the first song was Spellbound, one of the Joe Gibbs albums. It was the title track. And he came on, and the place, it was like, I don't know. I've never experienced anything like it. I played in front of bigger crowds, but the way those people were situated, the roar was coming from seemingly all directions. In front of you, off to the left, off to the right, from the air up in the left, from the air up in the right, behind you, this gigantic roar. And Dennis came out and started singing, and then everybody roared again, and then it was on. And I don't remember much about the show except that I got through it. And I was thinking while I was playing that this must be what it's like to stand on the wing of a jet plane while it's taking off.
Mm-hmm.
The wind whistling, it trying to hang on, and the wind going by and everything, and enormous amounts of sound, so on and so forth. So we got through the show, and I played well, and I felt good about everything. And I hadn't actually met Dennis. He came. He actually landed in Kingston while we were playing the early part of the show. They took him straight to Skateland, and they brought him in, and he was in the back watching us. So he had seen me, and he was expecting to see Chinna, because Chinna was we the people didn't have a lead guitarist as a band, but when they toured with Dennis, they always Chinna always came along. He and Dennis were friends, and he had played on a lot of the stuff for 90, so he knew a lot of the tunes, and they were Rastas, and they were brethren, so. And Chinna was really the best guitar player around as far as I was concerned. So, I've understood why he was the lead guitar player, and they'd actually given me some live tapes of Chinna playing with Dennis, and he sounded kind of like Duane Allman if Duane Allman were, Caribbean. They were really intimidating. They were really intimidating, these live tapes.
Right.
He had this EBO, which is the thing that makes the guitar sound like a cello, and he was, it was just ridiculous. So anyway, I don't know what Dennis thought when he saw me. Actually told me later he was expecting Chinna because nobody had told him there was, like another guitar player in We the People. And he heard me play, and he liked what he heard. And then we came out and did the show, and it went well. And, and he liked it. He liked the vibe. So we went back to doing our regular stuff. And then we got this show opening for Peaches and Herb, who were huge in Jamaica then.
Yeah.
I mean, to give you an idea, huge. It was such a big deal.
Reunited.
Yeah, that was the big tune.
Right.
And then they had another one called One Child of Man or something that was an album track. It wasn't in the set. And we did how many shows with them? We did 2 at the National Arena and 2 in Montego Bay. The promoters came to sound check, and Peaches and Herb didn't play that song. And the promoter went up to Herb and said, where's the song? One child is born, whatever it's called. And Herb says, oh, that's an album track. We never play that. Promoter says, that song is probably half the reason why you're here. The other half is Reunited. if you don't play that, there's going to be a riot. You ought to learn it. And Herb was a very smart guy, and Herb said to the band, "Okay, get the charts out. We're going to be playing this one." So they ran it down. They were really good. They had it right away. But he was surprised that in Jamaica that was a big song, and this speaks to the way Jamaica was. Somebody had the album, latched on to that song as being a thing, um, played it at dances or decided it was a good thing to play on the radio, played it, people responded to it, and it was as if it had been released in Jamaica as a single. That's the way.
Okay.
That's the way things happen, and they would latch on to unlikely tunes. And there's a wonderful website of I can't remember the name of it, but reggae, famous reggae songs, and the American or English song that it's taken from or influenced by. The thing that goes on now that everybody who doesn't know Jamaicans marvels at is Air Supply. Jamaicans love Air Supply.
Lost
I'm
in Love.
out of love. I'm
A lot of love.
right.
Urgent Emergency. Yeah, I mean,
to
a
to
little bit
give
before my time.
right to give you an idea of how popular they are. We opened for Barris Hammond a few years ago at Groovin' in the Park. We were playing with a bunch of the other acts, and then Barris had his band. He was second on the bill to a West Indian audience to Air Supply.
Okay. All right.
Okay, so
Well, there are some West Coast California ska guys that are really trying to adopt the same type of harmony that Air Supply did back in the day. And they're releasing records right now, and they're pretty successful. So who knows?
I happen to like Air Supply, but it's not every to a lot of people it's kind of corny, but and nobody was more surprised to find out that they were big in Jamaica than Air Supply. Because they had no idea,
Right.
like they had a
Okay.
nice run in the 80s. They were around playing, they're still out there playing, but they're not on the radio anymore. And then they got a promoter approached them, and they said, would you come to Jamaica? And they worked out the price, and they said, yeah, why not? But why would Jamaica want to hear us? So it was almost like the Beatles came or something in their heyday. Tickets were sold out in a second. Crowds around stadiums where they were playing. And these Australian guys are going, we're big in Jamaica. And they gave this lovely interview where they said basically, we had no idea. We're really, really grateful, and we want to come back, and we want the Jamaicans to know how much we appreciate their interest in our music. I mean, they really handle it beautifully. So anyway, back to Skateland. So we'd done the gig with Dennis. Dennis had seen me play, and then I guess he asked Lloyd, well, who is this guy? And Lloyd said, well, he's the new guitarist in my band. And Dennis said, okay, great. So shortly after the Peaches and Herb show, which is also kind of where I got started making a name in Jamaica, because so many people saw those shows, including the uptown people who wouldn't go to Skateland. Those were kind of more middle class oriented, and the prices were too much for the poor people to pay in most cases. We then got the message that Dennis Brown's first album for A&M was coming out, and they needed us to tour. Okay. So, unbeknownst to me, there was a lot of controversy about my being in the band. The Larry Maxwell is the guy, the Motown guy. I remember his first name. The record company wanted Chinna to go, and they were paying for everything. It was a promotional tour. the record company wanted Chinna to go. I think Larry might have wanted Chinna to go. Lloyd said, I love Chinna, but Andy's in the band. Either you take the whole band or you find another band.
Mm-hmm.
Which, to Lloyd's eternal credit, a lot of people don't know this. A lot of band leaders would say, record company tour? Sorry, Andy, we'll see you in 3 months.
Right. You get what you want. Right.
Right? Lloyd
Mm-hmm.
Parks, you hire me, you're hiring the whole band, and you're paying the whole band. We the People had a lead singer, Ruddy Thomas, very fine singer, had a number of hits of his own. And he was one of the engineers at Joe Gibbs. That was his day job. And even though Ruddy didn't have much to do when we toured with Dennis, he was an excellent tambourine player and he was a good background singer. So, he wasn't up there visibly doing much, but he was in the band. He was coming. You were paying him. Mm-hmm. And Lloyd was like that with every single time that I know about. People would say, well, I like your band, but I don't want the horn section. He'd go, you're hiring 9 people or you're not hiring anybody.
Okay.
That's rare. That's a level of band leader integrity that's very rare. And
I'm just thinking logistically, it's hard to do. Nine people is expensive. It's a load. It's a lot.
It was less expensive in the 80s, but he used to get offers for Caribbean tours, just bring the rhythm section and leave the horns. And he turned them all down. No.
Yeah.
We the People has a horn section. We the People has 2 guitarists. We the People has the lead singer. Everybody's going or nobody's going. Your choice.
Mm-hmm.
So Lloyd was adamant that I was going to play. And Dennis was kind of on the fence. He liked me, but Chinna was his friend. And then, so it looked like Chinna was going to do it. And Chinna told them no. There's another interesting story.
Mm-hmm.
And Chinna told me this himself. I actually heard about this from him later on when I got to be friendly with him. He said, they wanted me to go. And Lloyd was saying no. And Dennis was kind of, he wanted me to go, but he liked you too. And the record company wanted me to go because, I played with Bob and I was a name. And I told them, I know you don't know him, but I know him and Andy can handle it. And that apparently was the deciding factor. Chinna said, I don't want to do it and I don't need to do it because Andy can handle it. I know he's new, I know he's unknown, but he's ready for this. And Chinna was also playing with Jimmy Cliff at the time. And he realized that, there was more work with Jimmy than there was with Dennis. And he was trying to get his label High Times off the ground. So he was touring as much as possible to get, capital together to start things up. And I think he preferred Dennis's music, but long term, he realized that, Jimmy was busier, Jimmy paid better. I want to do my own thing. Let me do this. If I'm going to work for somebody else, let me work for somebody who's going to pay me the most money. So anyway, I don't know what would have happened if Chinna had said yes, he wanted to do it, but we'll never know. He told them no, use Andy. And that was that.
That was that. And so the tour begins.
The tour begins, and this was so crazy. This is like a 3-chapter thing in the book if I ever get to write it, but I'll make it as quick as I can. The other guys in the band had toured before, but they had never toured America apart from going to places like Miami and New York to back Jamaican artists, which is really an extension of what it's like in Kingston.
Mm-hmm.
You're playing to a Jamaican audience. The white press, the white music establishment doesn't know it exists. It's
right.
like the stuff I do now.
Right.
Later in his career, Dennis could draw, 5,000 people in Brooklyn and the Village Voice wouldn't even mention it.
Right.
They'd be writing about some indie band in Hoboken who sold out Maxwell's or something,
Mm-hmm.
another whole thing. But Um, it's what I call the curry goat circuit. The Jamaican equivalent of the Chitlin circuit. It's Jamaican venues for Jamaican audiences,
Right.
Jamaican promoters. It doesn't interact with, and it never did. Historically, it grew up by itself and never really interacted with the rock and roll machine.
Hmm.
And this is important to the history too. Um, Back in the 70s and the 60s, but really the 70s, record companies were very different than they are now. For one thing, they're very powerful. They were the gatekeepers. And the basic idea was they would sign you for 3 albums, but and after each album, they basically one album a year. And at the end of the first year, if the record company wanted to keep you, they would pick up the option. They would sign a piece of paper saying, you're going to be on our label for the next year. And then the same thing after the second year. If they didn't like you, or you didn't sell, or you annoyed the record company, or your A&R man got fired, whatever the story was,
Hmm.
you would have one album on a major, but you wouldn't have a second.
Right.
So, the record companies were footing the bill for all these artists, including Dennis. And because a Dennis Brown tour in 1981 in America could not possibly pay all its own expenses. So the record company acted like the bank. We'll pay the salaries of the musicians, we'll rent the bus, we'll do all this stuff to get you out there and promote your music, and then we'll recoup that out of your royalties. So then the recoup is the magic word that, doomed many artists. The
Right.
record company would charge all this stuff to them, and it was possible for the record company to make money where the artist never got a cent because the artists hadn't sold enough to recoup. So anyway, we didn't know any of that. All we knew is we were going on tour. Dennis probably had it explained to him at some point, but so the when you were on a label like A&M, one of the majors, um, that meant that the mainstream rock press, like Rolling Stone, was the big magazine then, and the rock press was very powerful in that era. If your record didn't sell, but the critics really thought you were great, the record company would often keep you around just because the critics liked you, and they figured eventually people who read the critics would come around to it. And this was actually Bob Marley's path to success. The first few Wailers tours didn't make money at all, but Blackwell really believed in them. He
Hmm.
kept financing them. And his real insight was this could be marketed to young rock audiences. They're rebellious, they have long hair, they smoke weed. College kids are going to love this. So that, and Blackwell saw the market, and then Black Uhuru was going for the same thing after Bob died. Rebellious, rebellious white youth, black youth too, but reggae never made the impact with Black Americans that it did with white Americans.
Interesting.
Well, one of my friend Peter Ashburn, that I might have referred to before in previous episodes, the Jingle King of Jamaica, one of the best musicians I know, and a really astute mind. We were, he had the best explanation I've heard for it. We were listening to, I think, it was Aretha live at the Fillmore West with King Curtis's band, which was basically the Atlantic record session band in the early 70s.
Hmm.
And we were listening to that and, marveling at how great it was. And he looked at me and he said, this is why Black Americans don't go for reggae. They don't need it. They have their own music. White Americans don't have their own Black music.
Hmm.
And I thought,
Interesting.
right? I'm going to think about that for the next 30 years, right?
Right.
So anyway, but this was true with the record companies did this with rock bands too. Trying to think of one that there were a lot of them they carried for a while until they made it. Gosh. Anyway, I'm blanking on my rock history here, but so anyway, the game plan for Dennis was tour America, play all the markets, not just the Jamaican venues, but try to break Dennis in as the successor to Bob, who was uh, at the time the deal was signed was very sick, and between the time Dennis was signed and the record came out, Bob had died. So there was a vacancy, and the marketing thing that they used for Dennis was the Crown Prince of Reggae. Bob is the king, Dennis is the Crown Prince. The king is gone. Here's the heir to the throne. Come out and check him out. So there was a lot of pressure. There's pressure anyway,
Yeah.
but there was a lot of, and then the other thing back in those days, and it's very different now, but in those days, the feeling was among reggae artists, if one of us benefits, that opens the door for other people. If people like Dennis Brown, they might really like Gregory Isaacs. If
Yeah.
people like Gregory Isaacs, they might really like Michael Prophet, like whoever.
Right.
So we were very conscious during this tour that we were not just playing for Dennis, we were not just playing for ourselves. We were playing for all the people in Jamaica who deserved a break and hadn't gotten one yet. And we were trying to blow the doors down.
Interesting. Interesting. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So there was this sense of community that we had. I don't know. Again, I haven't lived in Jamaica a long time. I don't know if people still feel that way, but we at least felt that way. And we used to have little meetings before every show to talk about this, just to remind everybody, we're not just doing this for us. We're doing it for Jamaica. We're doing it for the music.
Mm.
And, little me just in this with my mouth open all the time, whether it was physically open or not. Mentally, everything was wide open. Like I've never seen this before. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
So the tour started, as those kind of tours often did, with 4 nights at the Roxy, which was the showcase club in LA for the music business. In New York, it used to be the Bottom Line. If you got a record deal, your first tour, they would put you in the Bottom Line. And that was kind of your industry showcase. All the prominent critics would come, the booking agents, all the record company people, the radio people, the new flesh on the market. Let's see if we can sell this. So the LA version of that was the Roxy. And we had 4 nights there, 2 shows a night. Was it 5? I think it was 4. I'm really blanking. I should have had my diary here so I could tell you exactly, but at least 4. So we got to town, and then they asked us what equipment we would need for the tour, and I said, "What can I get?" And they said, "Anything you want." So I asked for a Mesa Boogie, which was in a boutique amp then, and there it was. I could have no more bought a Mesa Boogie amp on my own than I could.
Just dial it up. Right.
So I'm looking at this and going, wow, major label, this is cool. I like this, right? So we played the Roxy, not knowing what to expect, but we were very well rehearsed and very motivated. And we basically blew the industry out of the water. Like people went nuts. And we were kind of used to people going nuts for Dennis, so I didn't think anything of it.
So help me out here in perspective. What year are we talking about here?
81.
81.
I joined We the People in January of 81, and this is June of 81. Right. So 6 months later.
I'm thinking what was happening in American R&B sound in 81. Because I think that a lot of these guys like Dennis Brown.
Earth, Wind and Fire was right.
Earth, Wind and Fire, Shalimar.
Oh yeah, yeah. All that stuff. the Dick Griffey's Solar, the Shalimar Lakeside.
The
Um,
Gap Band.
yeah, yeah.
Um, uh,
Those things
so
got played in Jamaica. You dropped the bomb on me. That was a big one.
yeah, yeah. So
And then
what I'm thinking,
hip hop is starting to really, you know, people are starting to have to notice hip hop. It's not a novelty now in
right,
1981.
right,
It it's the it's the young upstart coming in about to make all this other shit obsolete. Excuse my
right.
language.
So I'm thinking that like Dennis Brown and there are other ones, Freddie McGregor, um, uh, these guys who do, I mean, it's not American R&B, but it's American R&B like, and they are the people involved thinking that maybe this is a way to capture some part of a slice of audience for these types of R&B ballads, where it wouldn't be that much of a leap if you were
You know,
listening to some of these. That's what I'm asking. I don't know.
that's a really smart question because that's exactly what was going on.
Hmm.
If you listen to um, Foul Play in particular, the first A&M album, there's several things that are very obviously geared toward American R&B audiences, and actually all the A&M albums have nods to R&B. And the last one, Prophet Rides Again, is a whole side of Dennis with pretty not great American R&B players in Miami that Joe Gibbs set up. We had nothing to do with that. There's one really good song on that side which we used to play, but so and Dennis, and I have to emphasize this stuff was not like Dennis selling out. You know, Dennis didn't sit there and go, "I'm going to betray my Rastafarian principles for
No,
commercial
no,
success."
because this stuff, this type of style was selling in Jamaica at the time.
Well, Jamaicans love this stuff. You
Yeah,
know, Dennis was he loved R&B. He
right.
knew a lot. You know, one of his favorite singers is Chuck Jackson, which you can really hear if you play them back to back. You can really hear, you know, that huge baritone. And in fact, he covered Any Day Now for the second album. And it was so important they actually cut two different versions of it, one with the Joe Gibbs studio band and another with Chalice. And I think the Chalice one is the one on the record, but I was there when they cut both of them. And that record in particular, they thought that was going to be the tune that could cross over. With
Mhm.
Foul Play, there are a couple of ones. There's one called On the Rocks, another one, the title track, Foul Play, which has real early 80s synthesizer sounds played by Bubbler, you know, the keyboard player in our band. And Willie Lindo played some great, you know, single
Right.
note R&B style stuff on it. So um, what we were doing at that time in the studios, and this is, you know, getting away from Dennis a little bit, but not really. We were basically making three or four kinds of records. Um, we were making the Roots Radics stuff, which is pure dancehall. That
Hmm.
wasn't aimed at anybody but the people who went to Skateland. If other people
Right.
liked it, great,
Right.
but that
Right.
was who it was aimed at.
Hmm.
Um, and then we were doing reggae covers of popular American songs that Jamaicans liked, and producers like Gigi specialized in that stuff. I did an awful version of Endless Love for him that took like 2 days
Lionel
because
Richie.
yeah, and Diana Ross.
Lionel Richie and Diana Ross. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, Lionel Richie was very big. Speaking about R&B people that
Well,
were really big,
when I
Commodores and
know,
Lionel Richie.
yeah, when I think about the limited library of knowledge that I have of Dennis Brown, uh, Lionel Richie does come to mind.
Yeah, well, we all loved him. You know,
Right.
I
Right.
I was the only person in the band who wasn't head over heels in favor of Lionel Richie, and then I realized eventually uh, at a rehearsal we had a rehearsal where this group called Home T4 was like a vocal group was covering Penny Lover, and we were, you know, we learned the song and I went out, you know, Lionel Richie song, yeah, I don't know. And the guy started singing it, and I went, wait a minute. I love Lionel Richie's songs. What I really don't like is his voice
Mm.
as much as his songs. And then once I got tuned into how good the songs were, I became a Lionel Richie fan. Parenthetical note, during my college years of hitchhiking across not hitchhiking, but greyhounding across the country, I actually saw the Commodores at the Whiskey, which was one of the other showcase clubs in LA, the Whiskey A Go Go, in 1974 when they had their second album out. And Lionel was the sax player.
Okay.
He had just started making the transition to piano playing romantic dude. And he had one of those songs in the set. You know, they were a funk band, they were a very good funk band. And then Lionel came out, you know, put his sax down, went over to the piano and started playing and singing. And I remember thinking, wow, this guy is really good. They should let him do this more.
Yeah.
so,
Well, I
so
mean,
I had seen,
every once in a while I would get some of those old mix tapes. That was the Jamaican stuff from like mid 80s, from like
oh,
85 or
sure.
86. And there was, I mean, there was one song that all these guys were just obsessed with covering, and it was Lately by Stevie Wonder.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we had to
And
play that. Namba used to sing it.
yeah, and and the thing is that they'd have the regular ballad version, and then somebody would do it to the somebody would sing it, and they'd put the Chakademus and Pliers beat in the background to it, and I'm just like, I mean,
Oh,
I was
yeah.
listening to it, and I'm like, this is pretty clever, but the one thing it signaled to me was that there really wasn't a wall between Jamaica and America in terms of what was being listened to. It's pretty obvious that that stuff was pretty hot in Jamaica.
Yeah, but interestingly, not everything.
Not everything.
No. There was stuff that I didn't hear from that era until I came back to the States.
Hmm.
Um, okay, so anyway, getting back to this crossover thing,
Right.
we would, you know, do the dance hall stuff, the Roots Radic stuff. We would do um, the reggae eyes, American tunes, and we would do, in some cases, the cultural tunes, which are sometimes the same as the Radic stuff, but the Rastafarian type guys. And the other thing that we would do was with singers that had an R&B friendly voice, we would try to push the BPM upwards to the low end of R&B. Now in those days, R&B was kind of between 90 and 130.
Hmm.
With 120 being the sweet disco aerobics Jane Fonda workout tape
Right.
spot. Now, if
Right.
you're playing Jamaican music at 120, you're playing scat.
Yes.
Reggae BPMs, the classic reggae BPM, if you're playing at 105, you're really pushing it.
Yeah.
It's hard to make it feel right when you're playing it that fast.
Yeah. Well, the
So,
traditional hip hop sound is between 85 and 100.
yeah, now see,
So,
that's fine. That's fine for reggae, which is which
yeah,
is why I think it crossed over to hip hop and didn't cross into
exactly.
it.
Exactly.
It has a lot to do with the BPM speed.
Hmm.
So we didn't. We had our, the DJ thing, and that was over the Roots Radic stuff, and that's down at the low end of the BPM spectrum, probably 65 to 85,
Hmm.
maybe 90. But uh, we would take artists. I remember one that I worked with, a guy named Glenn Ricks, who was a Jamaican. He was in a group called the Famous Flames or something, not the James Brown group, but he had a very famous version of Holly Holy, the Neil Diamond tune. That's another artist that's huge in Jamaica, Neil Diamond. They love him. and and Glenn was signed to this guy who had a lot of money backing him, and we did a whole album's worth of stuff with Glenn, who wrote R&B type tunes. He played good guitar. He had nice chord changes. And we would try to bridge it between something that would go on the R&B charts, but something that was also reggae. And it was really hard. I didn't understand why it was hard at the time, but looking back on it, it was really an issue of the beats per minute. R&B stuff works, the dance stuff is 100 plus, particularly in those days, the Shalimar and those kind of things. And you couldn't play reggae that fast and without it being ska, which was completely not a thing in Jamaica at that point. You didn't even hear much of it on the oldie stations. Jamaicans had abandoned that feel as popular as it was everywhere else.
Okay.
There was nobody. We would play ska at the end of our country sets, dances in the country sets as part of the history of the thing. But we would never go on a gig and play Scatolite songs. No artist would come out and want to sing them. We backed a few ska artists, but it was very rare. They didn't get a lot of shows.
Mm-hmm.
We played with, what was that guy's name? Queen Ifrica's his daughter. Can't remember his name. A few of the ska artists, but it was rare. So anyway, with the Dennis records, you can hear them trying to push the BPM up on certain songs. When I listen to them now, I think, if we hadn't been doing that and we'd kind of let it fall where we would have let it fall had we not been conscious of American R&B audiences, that might sound better now in 2024 than it does. So,
I think the artists are going through that crisis in America too. You had, Michael Jackson was selling like mad, and suddenly these long ballad albums didn't do as well as they used to do, and I think the industry was consistently pushing that. They like the idea of having this, this R&B pop crossover kind of thing because it sold so well. People liked El DeBarge. They liked Michael Jackson, So yeah, I would think that it was happening here too.
Okay, and the other kind of music that we used to do was lovers rock for England.
Right.
And that always had like major ninths and minor ninths. And in the immortal words of Bubbler, we conquered England with the major ninth chord. Or the minor ninth chord. I forget which one he said it was. But so basically when we were doing a session, it was one of these 4 or 5 kinds of places that we were aiming. So to get back to the Dennis thing, the idea was, from A&M's point of view, get attention from rock critics who are looking for the next Bob Marley to latch on to Dennis. So that's going to get you to the white teenage audience, the Reed's Rolling Stone or college audience, and have a few tunes in the set that could be mistaken for R&B or could fit into an R&B set in a club, and try to get black radio interested in that, and get him out there and see which one of these areas works best for him.
Right.
So that was the game plan. And what happened was the Roxy sold out all 8 shows, and Roxy held 500 people, so it was 4 shows. Now, of those 500 people, easily half of them were on the guest list. Record company people, press people, radio people. So what happened with the album was, the first week in LA, we played to 2,000 people. The next week, or whatever the tally was for the album in LA after we played the Roxy, they sold, I think, 1,000 albums in a week in LA, which is amazing for a new act. And what that means is practically everybody who went to the Roxy and saw the show who wasn't getting the
Bought the
album
record.
free
Right.
bought the record.
Right.
So A&M starts going nuts, like, oh my God. And we were not like a big priority for them. We're kind of, I would say, a mid priority. They didn't spend a lot of money to get him. They knew that they would probably recoup just on sales to Jamaicans. It was kind of, a good move from the record company's point of view. From our point of view, it's the chance to get in. And then the tour that followed was hugely successful musically and artistically. The record company botched a few things. Joe Gibbs, who was Dennis's manager, there's a real conflict of interest, record company and manager, managed to screw up a bunch of things. And it really affected our career because what happened was, unbeknownst to us, in the audience at the Roxy was Maurice White, leader of Earth, Wind, and Fire.
Yeah.
He came backstage and he said to, I guess, somebody at the record company, whoever it was he was talking to, Larry Maxwell probably, said, "This is the greatest thing I've seen in 5 years. I want Dennis to open our 1981 world tour, 1982 world tour."
Right.
It's going to be 18 months, I think. And what song was fueling the tour? Let's Groove Tonight was their last big hit.
Right.
So we should have been the opening act for that world tour. Had that happened, the whole story would have been very different.
Right. Now, if I remember correctly, if memory serves me right, Maurice White was he quite the leader of the band, or
Yeah, he was definitely leader.
Philip Bailey
the lead singer.
He was the lead singer, and he kind of had his own. Okay.
No, later on, after it split up, he did things on his own. But in 1981, he was just the lead singer of Earth, Wind, and Fire. Yeah. And it was really their last great hurrah. I don't remember what happened. I don't know exactly what happened to them, but that was the last big thing that they did. And they've reformed and been out there, making money, but not being a radio factor. So anyway, why did we not do the tour? Well, the other thing that happened, which made a lot of sense for A&M, was their biggest band at the time was the Police. So that was another possible hookup for from A&M's point of view. Have Dennis open for the Police.
Ah, well, that's interesting.
And the booking agency that we had was FBI, which was owned by Miles Copeland, who was Stuart Copeland's brother. I don't know if he owned it, but he was a big player in it. So it would have been a no-brainer to get Dennis Brown on a tour with Police.
Right.
So what happened? Joe Gibbs did not pay FBI the booking commissions for the tour.
And so didn't happen.
So nothing happened. And we didn't find out until next year when we were talking about Solar and Shalimar. Dick Griffey decided that Solar should maybe do reggae. And he put on a big show at the Pauley Pavilion in UCLA. And this is early 82, we came and played, and we backed Dennis and some other artists. I think we backed Barrington. I don't remember. There's a poster somewhere in here. And right before we went on, the guy from FBI came backstage and he attached Dennis's salary, like Dennis's money for the gig.
Mm-hmm.
So that he found out we were in town. He said, "Okay, you owe us commissions. You're playing a gig in my town that I didn't book.
There you go. Boom.
Yeah. So we didn't get paid, and we blamed Dennis, and we didn't play for Dennis for like a year. And this was tragic because the next album came out, Love Has Found Its Way, and that was the album. That was the real sweet spot to me of Dennis, going international. Willie Lindo produced it. He did an amazing job. He wrote some beautiful tunes. He played great guitar on it. Everybody pitched in. Dean Fraser helped with it. Clive Hunt, I think, was involved. Everybody really good in Kingston that had an overview was involved in that record. I didn't play on it because Willie's producing it. Willie's a guitar player, but I was around when they were doing it because I figured I would need to know the songs, and I was just fascinated. So that record came out, and he didn't tour on it because his band wasn't going to play for him until they got paid. So that and Love Has Found Its Way, the title track, was actually a regional hit in Rochester, a bunch of secondary markets. And I don't know if you're familiar with Hal Jackson, the legendary New York R&B DJ. He was working into his 90s, and he used to have a wonderful Sunday afternoon show called like the Hal Jackson's some kind of Sunday Classics, I think it was called.
Mm-hmm.
And every other week he would play Love Has Found Its Way. And what happened was in the early 80s, the name of the game was payola. It's always been the name of the game. But in the 80s, the way they had worked it out was record companies couldn't pay radio to play things. So you had to hire independent promoters, many of whom were mob connected. And basically they would say, if you want your record at these stations, it's going to cost you X, and we'll get it played.
I think there was an episode of WKRP about that where they would
sure
slip the $100 bills inside of the record
there were all
sleeves
kinds of things that
and
they did.
and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So there's actually a very good book this title escapes me, written by somebody who used to write for Rolling Stone, who actually investigated all this, after the fact, and traced all the various connections and so on and so forth. And of course, Joe Gibbs wasn't going to go into his pocket to do this, even though Dennis was his flagship artist. And A&M couldn't, because they were under a lot of scrutiny, and the record companies couldn't do this. You would have to give the money to the independent promoters, and they could do it for you.
Right.
And very often the artist management or booking agency, or both, were the people who came up with the money for the independent promoters. So in those days, it wasn't all Clear Channel and iHeart like it is now. There were still regional radio stations, and records became hits by accident because some DJ liked the B-side and played it. That stuff still used to happen. And that's what happened with Love Has Found Its Way. Some people, local R&B programmers really liked it, and they played it. And it's basically, it's a straight reggae tune. It's a beautiful song. It's very romantic. Dennis gives a great performance on it. It's, to me, it's the high point of what early 80s reggae could be, in terms of sophistication and international appeal.
Yeah.
Making a record for that audience that doesn't sound at all forced.
Right.
And
okay, so we are. I think this is a good place to stop right now. And are you up for part 4 next week?
Yeah, sure. Let me make sure I'm free.
Okay.
The place to resume part 4 is where Copeland Forbes straightens out the issues involved. We go tour for Dennis's final A&M album, and we open for Peter Tosh, who is at the height of his career.
Okay.
Another interesting.
All right, members of the audience, are you listening? Peter Tosh next week.
Yep. Okay. So that's it.
All right. So, to my CNB Reggae audience, once again, continue to tune in, and we will attempt to deliver original content every week. This is a particularly important week for CNB Reggae for two reasons. One is this is the week of 420, and judging from our investigative capacity, uh, nearly every reggae act in the entire Mid Atlantic has booked at least one show over the next 4 days. CNB Reggae will cover as many shows as it can with its limited resources. And also, this week marks the second anniversary of CNB Reggae covering who is playing where in the Mid Atlantic 1 week at a time. So this is quite a momentous time for us. Anyway, continue to tune in, and we will be able to deliver part 4 next week. Take care.